Hello, my name is Andrew Everett, and today my guest is Mark Crowley. He has 25 years in the banking industry, followed by extensive research in employee engagement. He speaks to global audiences about organizational culture and leadership. He's written more than 25 articles in Fast Company magazine, and he's written Lead from the Heart, Transformational Leadership for the 21st Century. Thank you very much, Mark, for coming on to talk today.
I'm thrilled to be here, Andrew. It's fun to see the book like that.
Yeah, it's a tangible, when it's four-color tangible book, it's kind of comes to life, right?
Exactly.
So in your book, you talked about some pretty dismal statistics about employee disengagement. And I think that really kind of sets the framework for why a new approach to leadership is so important. So why don't we start with that? On page 10, you said, how we lead people today, how we seek to make people productive in the workplace is so detached from the new reality that it's actually become destructive influence. And you quoted a Towers Perrin study that said 21% of US workers are engaged in their jobs. So the corollary to that would be that 79% must be disengaged. It's a huge productivity problem. And I read an article that you wrote subsequently that said the problem's gotten even worse. And I know you've spoken to the people who've actually conducted the research for the conference board, and you've spoken to the CEO of Gallup. So you have really gone on a deep dive into this employee engagement research. So maybe we could start with that.
Well, I think the big picture is that we've had this traditional view of workers. We've really only been having like companies and corporations for basically only about 100 plus years, really. And so what we typically thought to do was to bring people in and treat them like machines. So we treated our employees, and the funny thing is that we've created this language around our employees are our greatest asset, but we treat them like a liability. In fact, they show up on the balance sheet or an income statement as a liability, right? So the idea has always been, let's pay people as little as possible and squeeze as much out of them as possible. And that's the way that we're going to drive the greatest revenue and income for the owners, whether that's shareholders or somebody who owns the business. And so up until recently, people were willing to do that. It didn't necessarily mean that people were happy doing that, but people were willing to take that exchange because it allowed them to meet their basic needs for food, shelter, right? And so meeting their basic needs and supporting their families and making sure that they had an income, people were willing to go to work every day and get a paycheck. And companies basically took advantage of that. They offered their employees very little in exchange for their work beyond that. So big picture is that 75 years ago, a psychologist named Abraham Maslow was really the first person who laid out this idea that people need and want much more than just meeting their basic needs. But if all you have in front of you is the challenge of meeting your basic needs, then what Maslow was talking about was irrelevant. So now you fast forward 75 years later, and most people in America, so we've reached a point, Andrew, where most people, and this certainly has been blown up by the COVID pandemic, and so we're really talking in the big picture here. But what we have is a society that can afford to put a roof over their head and put food on their table. And as a result of that, they're looking at work very differently, and they're saying, I need to have much more than just a paycheck. I want meaning, I want purpose, I want growth. I want to be recognized and appreciated for what I'm doing. I want to work with people that I enjoy. I want to feel cared for. I want to feel valued. And so what we have is this old model, and we've continued to pass it on from generation to generation. My granddad managed this way, my dad managed this way, I'm managing this way. And so we fought any change which basically says, what if what we've been doing no longer works? What if it never really worked all that well? But what if today the circumstances are very different? And so I think the validation of this is that the engagement numbers across the world are really bad, and they haven't gotten much better. They were improving a little bit heading into the COVID pandemic, largely because companies were paying people, which sort of undermines my whole argument. But when people are getting more money, pay is still a driver of engagement, and people are making more money, so they're feeling a little bit better. But the numbers were still very, very low. And I'll say this just to sort of, lean into this conversation. But I'm changing my opinion on this because now we have the pandemic, and engagement is still an issue. But I think well-being is becoming an even bigger issue, because I think people have been forced to work remotely. They're away from their people. They don't know when this is going to go over. Mental health issues have become a very big crisis in this country, and they were leaning into that before.
Mm-hmm.
So we haven't really made the transition. So my principal argument is we need to, basically erase the whole whiteboard, start all over. And it starts with hiring people who really, truly care about the success, growth, and well-being of other people. And you can drive great performance that way because it matches up to what people need and want.
It's like treating people like human beings instead of human capital, a
Well,
liability.
the thing is that people keep saying we need to be more human in leadership, and I just totally disagree with that. We need to be more humane. Humans have good sides and we have not so good sides. And the dark side is what comes out under stress, right? So if your company isn't doing well, or if your company is being pressured to hit a quarterly number, you look around and you go, what can we do? Well, we can't drive revenue that quickly, so let's lay off 100 people, right? That's the dark side. Or let's cut pay, or let's cut benefits, or let's do something to take away from employees. And the minute you start taking away from people, you destroy trust, because people are saying, I'm killing myself here. And the first thing you do is go to me. You want to take advantage of me in order to meet this. So I think it's really more about being humane and about truly being caring about people. And it has to come authentically. It has to come from here.
You mentioned layoffs, and I think that, in terms of talking about the long-term trend, the classic thing about, your grandfather or your great grandfather could go work for General Electric or IBM and stay their whole life at one company. We have a much more transient workforce now. We have, companies get acquired and then lay off 20,000 people and their stock goes up. Silicon Valley is kind of a revolving door of people wanting to go to the next startup to get in and on an IPO. So there's less. It seems like there's just a climate of the company's less loyal to me, so I'm less loyal to the company. Do you think that plays into the?
Yeah, I think every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if you have companies that are, instinctively laying off people or taking away benefits or making people feel vulnerable, when you go back to Maslow, besides food, water, and shelter, the next, most fundamental need that people have is for safety, emotional and psychological safety. So every time we do something that, destabilizes how people feel like, well, wait a minute here, I'm the next guy out the door if something else happens here. So screw these people, I'm going to go somewhere else. That's kind of our instinctive reaction. So now you've got people that are saying, you know what, I'm looking out for my own career and I'm not going to get, caught up with that. Interestingly, my father spent 42 years with General Electric. Worked his way up to one of the most senior level positions in the company. And, that's sort of unheard of. But what's interesting is that I think there's enough science around this to show that all of this rapid turnover is not only costly to organizations, but it's really disruptive. Mm-hmm. And they ultimately don't perform that well. Like there's no evidence that if you lay off 10,000 people that suddenly your company is going to turn around.
Well, you lose your institutional memory for one thing.
You do. You lose your institutional memory. And not only that, you lose people's hearts. And what I mean is that if all you're doing is, undermining the well-being of people, then people start to feel that. And everything is reciprocity. If you do something generous for me, I'm going to give back to you. And if you take from me and make me feel threatened, I'm going to give that back to you too. So we reap what we sow is really what it comes down to.
The conversation so far has kind of focused on, in terms of the reasons for this being more profit-driven, but I'm wondering, does this phenomenon exist also in the nonprofit and government sectors? And I think the loyalty is probably, government employees is the only sector that still has pensions, basically. So people stick around for a long time, but do they stick around? There's actually a great quote from another book I read that says the only thing worse than somebody who quits and leaves is somebody who quits and stays.
Right.
So that was from James Autry of Confessions of an Accidental Businessman. But anyway, I guess the question is, do you see this disengagement problem only in the for-profit sector, or is this also across the board?
No, it's to use the word now appropriately, it's a human issue, right? So if just think about it. If I hire you and I bring you into a government position or to a nonprofit, and I give you the luxury of saying, well, if you stay here for 30 years, you're going to get a pension. 5 or 6 years into that, you're like, hey, that's only 24 more years, so I'm going to hang in there. So what do you do during those 24 years? And how committed are you? And how creative are you? How innovative? How hard are you willing to work for that organization? And so what it really comes down to is that if you have a manager who truly cares about you, who truly invests in you, who challenges you, who gives you opportunities for growth and opportunities to take bigger responsibilities, even laterally, right? All of that suddenly means I love going to work. And when you have people loving going to work, they're going to do great stuff. If you have people that are just turning out the calendar pages, 23 years, 22 years, you can just imagine, the kind of work that those people are doing. They're just phoning it in.
2,000 days to retirement, 2,999 days to retirement.
I spoke at one of the largest, I won't say which, United States government agency that, really had a need for this kind of information. And I have to tell you, these people were just phoning it in. Every single one of the people that I work with was just phoning it in because there was just no inspiration there. We had technical difficulties and they were trying to solve it. And everybody in the room was calling their spouse at 4:00 saying, I'm not going to be home on time because we've got this problem. And I was like, wow, like you're just rushing out the door at 4:00. I can't get home to walk the dogs. And I'm like, I was just astonished by how uncommitted they were. It was all about the clock. It wasn't about trying to solve the problem or sticking it out and doing the right thing. And so it just struck me, this is an agency that has lost heart, completely.
So I guess we've started out on kind of a negative note, defining the problem. Let's kind of turn it around and figure out what to do about it. You have your four practices of leading from the heart in your book. Could we maybe just go through those?
Sure. You want to start?
So the first one is hiring people with a heart.
Well, what this really means is, a lot of times we have an employee and they do well and they're working well for us. And then we have another opportunity. There's another job totally unrelated. And we go, well, Bill's doing a good job here. Let's put Bill into this job. And what we don't really think about is Bill excited about this kind of work? Does he want to make this kind of a move? Is this something that's in Bill's best interest to do this? Has Bill even got the talents for this? So we just sort of, and I've seen this throughout my career, this idea of just filling positions as opposed to filling it with people who really love that kind of work. And holding the discipline of saying, I'm not going to fill this position until I have someone who not only has the talent for this, but who has the heart for it, who really, is passionate about it, likes this kind of work, because that's really what makes the difference. It's sometimes we hire people that don't have the talent, but I think most of the time we do a good enough job in the interview process to put people in who have the skills to do it. The question is, do they get up every day and say, I really enjoy this kind of work and I'm going to do my best at it? So it's important because there are certain attributes that we need to look for in every job. And if we don't have the discipline in saying, what are those attributes? And then making sure that we hire people with those attributes, you're going to end up with people who may have the talent, but really aren't passionate about doing that kind of work. And it's dead on arrival. It's simply, you just can't elevate people who just aren't really excited about doing the kind of work. So it takes a lot of effort to know what you're looking for, and then you're feeling pressure because there's goals that have to be met, and just go, let's just fill this, just hire that guy. And then 3 months later you realize that guy isn't the right person, and so now you have to start all over, and you've disrupted the team, and what do you do with that guy? Sorry, but that didn't work out. Well, that's a leadership problem. So it's really having the disciplines to hire people who really love the kind of work that you're doing. And the interesting thing is, I mean, there are people that um, embalm bodies for a living,
Yeah,
mortuaries, right?
right.
And like, that's a job I wouldn't want. But when you talk to people who are doing it, you'll say, well, our family's been in this business for 100 years, and we're extremely caring, and people, want to bring their family members here because of the way we treat them. And, so it's like, oh, well, it's a totally different experience that I would be able to relate to. But those are the kinds of people that you want to hire in a mortuary. So it works the same way.
So yeah, hiring seems like it's a really critical and very difficult aspect of management, not only in terms of getting the person capable of doing the individual job, but being a part of the organization as a whole, like fitting in with the culture of the organization.
Well, I found that the best way to solve that problem is to take highly talented, highly successful people in the very role that you're hiring for and bring them into the interviewing process, and to give them a true say. Like what I used to do in hiring managers. So I used to be in financial services, and I would have managers reporting to me, and I would bring in 2 or 3 or even 4 other high performing I'll call them actualized people that really understood the job, who did it really, really well, and who understand, all the dimensions of it and what it takes from a personality standpoint to work with the people that were already there. And I would interview people, and then I would bring in my final candidates. So I'm basically saying, any of these people could do this job. Which one do you want? And they would have the instinct of, would the rest of the team like this person? Does the person have the right personality for this? Do they have the right drive? Are they going to cooperate versus compete? All those kinds of nuances they can pick up in an instant. And I've had many times where I went in thinking it's going to be candidate A that everybody loves, and find out that the last thing in the world they would want to do is hire candidate A. And so I always went with their recommendation and never backfired on me. So thoughtfully hiring is a very important part of this.
Do you think that that's because different people surface different, they ask different questions and surface different issues, or do you think it's more about just the chemistry of the personalities?
I think that, let's face it, you go into a job interview, your goal is to impress, right? You want to win the job. But I think that somebody who's in the job already, doing the job, can pick up from just the conversation and how people are thinking and how they're, responding to me. So I'm the more senior person. So the person they think that they have to impress is me, because I'm
Right,
the big
right.
cheese in the room. And they're looking to see if there's integrity with that. Like, would you give me the same answer? And I think that's intuition. There's an intuitive sense of whether or not somebody's going to be a good fit or not. And when you get 3 of them in the room and they all have the same answer, you're very wise to let them make that choice.
Okay, point 2 was heart to heart, connect on a personal level.
So we've always thought that leave your troubles at the door, and I don't really care that much about who you are, Andrew. I mean, I know who you are, and I know you have some kids, and I know you like to hike, but basically, I don't really get into those conversations with you. That's sort of the relationship. Our relationship is work. I give you your assignments, you do them. I give you your rewards. I give you a review. I give you some bonuses and incentives and whatever, and that's really our relationship. And I'm saying it can't longer be that. It really, a manager's role is to be like a coach. So I'd actually like to take any manager of people, I'd like to just reinvent that and say, we don't have that anymore. What we have is a coach, because a coach is an advocate. A coach is someone who wants to get to know you. And I don't mean go for Sunday dinner at their house or go have beers with them. I mean, get to know the person and what their aspirations of work are, and what are the challenges that you face in doing your work. Do you have an elderly parent? Do you have a kid who's struggling in school? Are you going through a divorce? If they want to share that with you, just knowing what's going on in their life gives you insight, but only if you're going to use that insight. So let's say you have an hour-long commute, and it's an hour-long commute in a normal day, but some days, like Mondays, everyone's on the road and it takes an hour and a half, and you get into work at 9 o'clock and you're frustrated. What if I said, Andrew, why don't you leave your house at 9 o'clock? You want to work till 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and avoid the traffic? Come in an hour later, avoid the traffic. What if you have school kids that want to be taken to school? I don't mind it. Just get your work done. I don't care what hours you're working. It's having some flexibility. So the point I'm really trying to make is the more you understand what's going on in someone's life and understand what their individual interests are in terms of growing in their career, you can then do things for them. So I've had people come to me and say, I want your job. And I've had some people say, I'm very content in the job that I have. So the developmental opportunities for those people is different in the sense that I've got to do some things to challenge the person who wants my job and give them real clear, opportunities to help them get there if they're qualified. But the other people is like, okay, so what's something you might still like to learn? So let's do some things to get you deeper so that you feel even better in this job, even though you have no growth aspirations beyond that. So you're managing people uniquely as a result of this. That's really what this is about.
It sounds like, clearly it has to be sincere. It's not just kind of get to know people.
Yeah, it's interesting because I before this, I received a tweet from Tom Peters, everybody in Search of Excellence, right? And so he tweeted me, and I tweeted something out about this new Ohio State study said that, if somebody's upset about something, if you just say to them, I can understand why you're upset with that, Andrew, that it instantly changes their state of being and eliminates the negative emotions that they're experiencing. And that in the control group, that those people that were angry about a situation that didn't have somebody intervene and say that to them marinated in negative emotions. So that's what the study was. I tweeted that out. Tom Peters responded immediately and say, yeah, but he calls this give a shitism.
Yes.
So if you don't give a shit about people, then none of this is going to work. And, so I'm saying, well, I'm not really managing to the lowest common denominator. I'm saying, I'm hoping that the people that are interested in my work are already on board with, I have to care about my people. I'm interested in how do I do that you start off there. But if you don't really care about people, and I have an interesting stat on that in a second, you're never going to succeed as a leader any longer. I fundamentally believe that. And Gallup has shown, interestingly, that basically only a third of people on the planet have what I've come to call a caring gene. Like, there's plenty of people on the planet that just want their own money. They want their own growth. They want their own success. They're not really interested in what happens to other people. It's like, good luck to you, Andrew. It's not like I don't want you to do well. I just don't care about it, But if you're managing somebody, that's not a good attribute, right? Mm-hmm. So it's interesting because when you look at engagement, it's right about a third of the people that are engaged in America. And then you have only a third of managers that really care about people if you aggregate this. So it's sort of an interesting statistic, right? So it validates my whole theory that if you don't care about the success, growth, and well-being of other people, you shouldn't be in a leadership role.
Maybe a good summary of that would be something that you tweeted recently, which is, I like this phrase, emotional curiosity.
Yeah. What do you like about it?
You said, well, you tweeted emotional curiosity, a desire to learn about and to know what motivates and inspires other people. So I think it just kind of summarizes.
That's exactly what it is.
What you were just saying.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Number 3 is empower the heart, maximize employee potential.
So this is really about growth. What are the things that we've learned? And as you started off earlier, I've gotten to develop quite a relationship with Gallup. And a lot of people just poo-poo the whole engagement thing and think it's hokum and doesn't really mean anything. And I totally disagree. Although, as we talked earlier about this shift into well-being, I think that's really where we need to go, because how COVID and the pandemic has been this catalyst. But one of the things that Gallup has really been able to prove is that the sense that I am growing, quote unquote, is one of the greatest drivers of engagement there is. So whether you're the guy or the woman that wants to be, take my job, the example I gave you a minute ago, or you're the person who just really wants to just, finish their career doing what they're doing, they still want to grow. They still want to get up every morning knowing I'm learning, I'm cultivating new skills, I'm being challenged. And so a job of a leader now is really to make sure that people are constantly being nudged, being even not pushed in a bad way, but pushed in a very positive way to be learning. So that could be taking classes, that could be given temporary assignments that broaden their abilities and work with different people in a different department or a different area or whatever. It could be reading books and discussing them. There's a million ways to keep people engaged from a growth standpoint. But if you don't do that, once people start to feel stale and they start, I've learned this job and I don't really have anything else to do and I'm just putting in my time, people are dead inside. So the way to keep them alive inside is to keep them growing.
Interesting. You know what this reminds me of is, are you familiar with the concept of flow?
Of course. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'll butcher the pronunciation, but it's a Hungarian psychology, it's a Hungarian name, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi.
Yeah.
And so one of the state of flow is you have to be at a state of high competence and high challenge. So,
there you go, right? I mean, so it's a very good point that you're making. You're keeping people in flow, regardless of whether they're aspirate. Sometimes you think that growth has to be like this, right? Or from a career standpoint, the only way you're going to be happy is if you keep getting promoted, and that's just not true for most people, right? What's true is you get up and you go to work and you find out that, hey, we're going to give you this opportunity to, and by the way, the learning doesn't necessarily have to be job related. This is a mistake that a lot of managers make. So you're in accounting, so we're going to send you to an Excel class, and you're going to master Excel because that'll speed up your work with accounting. Okay, that's good. But what about teaching me how to buy a house? What about teaching me how to, buy a car, refinance a home, or, here's some insight on how to be thinking about your retirement and your investments, and bringing people in to speak about that. How about speaking about mental health and your well-being and diet and all kinds of things that are unrelated seemingly to the work itself. But what happens is that people just feel so grateful that you're making that effort to teach them, and it broadens them. I believe anytime you improve one discipline in life, you're automatically improving all disciplines of life. Knowledge doesn't stop. You go, well, I've just learned this information, but I can only apply it here. So they become more ability to have more intellectual conversations with people, and it influences their thinking, and ultimately people do better work. So that's what I mean.
How does this relate to the concept of mentoring?
Well, like I said, it really comes down to the word coaching. So I'm indifferent to coaching, mentoring. I like the idea of a coach because a coach's ambition, like Mike Krzyzewski, who's arguably the greatest men's college basketball coach in history, at Duke University. When there's 2 minutes left in the game and they're down by 5 points, he doesn't say, hey, I'm taking my suit off and I'm going into the game, right? He has to teach the people who are his players how they can go and spend the next 2 minutes and get those 5 points back and win, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of times in business, you get into struggle and the manager basically just steps in and tries to handle it and take it over. And that works occasionally, but most of the time you want your own people to be able to solve their problems in front of them versus you having to come in and solve them all the time. So this idea of a coach is basically saying, I need to teach my people to be able to respond to whatever comes their way, whether that's an emotional intelligence point of view, whether that's a skill set, whether that's a cultural thing. Here's how we handle those kinds of situations. Whatever that is, it's teaching and training and coaching and reinforcing knowledge. And so I think of mentoring as perhaps having somebody outside of your job, like outside of your boss, being someone who takes you under their wing and tries to teach you. And I'm totally an advocate for that in terms of management. I think the manager's role really needs to be the mindset of a coach.
Makes sense. So in terms of building skill sets, a lot of what you've talked about so far, it was interesting that you talked about things that are outside of the job, but the parts that were within the job sounds like it's focusing on their current job function. What do you think about in terms of helping people with career trajectory?
Well, like I said, it goes back to this idea of knowing your people. So if you know what it is that they want to do, obviously sometimes I have ideas, right? So I'm in with you, I'm spending time with you, I work with you every day. I start to go, hey, Andrew's a talented guy. And so we may have conversations about, hey, would you ever want to do this? Would you ever want to try this? Those kinds of conversations, right? So some of it's on me, but a lot of it is on the person and in understanding what their goals are. So I had somebody literally come to me and say, I want your job and you're not doing enough to help me. I wrote about her in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought I was doing enough, but what she was really saying was, chop, chop. You got to help me here. I want to get this sooner than later. I don't want to be 90 years old when I get it. And so, and there were my job existed in the company in other geographies. So she was willing to move and she ended up getting it, by the way. But what she was really saying to me was, I want dedicated coaching that's going to help me get to this job. And so I sat down and just started thinking it through, like, what would it take? And for whatever reason, the job that I had, I sort of instinctively knew how to do. It was the right thing for me. For her, she needed to grow and develop certain skills. And so I knew what those were. And so we built the plan, she executed the plan, and she got the job. I think that's very much part of the manager's job. You can't be indifferent. And by the way, I don't know about you, but I've worked for people who didn't give a shit about what happened to my career. They were only interested in their own. And they used me as a means of justifying their own career, right? Getting their own recognition, their own pay, their own visibility within the company. It was always about them.
Right. Take credit for everything.
Even sometimes insincerely going, well, my team did a really good thing, but the people themselves, we could all feel that we were being used and abused. And interestingly, that person ended up going to another organization and tried to recruit a lot of the people that used to work for him. And to a person, everyone said, oh, I really can't move right now, or I'm kind of happy doing what I'm doing right now, or I think I may have another opportunity, another year from now, so I'm really not going to move. What they were doing was giving excuses. They never wanted to work for this guy again. Because they didn't want to be taken advantage of. We can feel this. That's a big part of my whole thesis, is that the heart is a feeling sensing organ that's connected to the mind. And the heart is constantly sending out signals to the mind. So if I'm working for somebody and I suddenly have this feeling that, wait a minute, this guy doesn't really care about me, he just cares about himself, that sends the mind, mayday messages, like, whoa, wait a minute here. You're working for somebody who's really self-serving, and that's not a good place to be. Now, he was able to drive results because people were at a senior level and people were being compensated. But as I said, inevitably it caught up with them because people said, I'm never going to work for that guy again.
I actually had a point about that. We'll get to that. We'll get to that later. I don't want to get off course with the 4 points. So let's finish up with the 4 points. The last one was inspire the heart, value and honor achievements.
Every manager, if you go up to them and you say, how important is recognition? They go, it's hugely important. Everybody knows that. But what I saw through the course of my career is that many managers, truthfully, most managers, gave very little attention to what truly matters to people. It's not to say, Andrew, good job, thanks for getting the project done. That's one. That's the low hurdle. And a lot of managers miss it. Andrew knows I care about him. Andrew knows I appreciate his work. I don't need to tell him. There's still that attitude out there. But what I've learned is that what people really need, particularly when they've worked on something for a while, like you give them a month-long project or you give them a goal by the end of the quarter, we need you to hit this number, and people get there. What happens, managers, when they get to the end, they go, okay, good job, Andrew. Now we're 2 weeks behind on this other project, so I really need you to get on that. And so people are like, wait a minute, like you didn't even, like, that's it? You're not even going to thank me for this, right? But it's deeper than that. What people really want to do is be able to savor it. And they want to know that that they came in, at 6 o'clock in the morning for 2 weeks in order to get this done, or they didn't go to their kids' little league games, or they worked weekends, they made sacrifices, right? What they really want is for the manager to say, Andrew, before we talk about the next project, I really want to make sure you know how much I appreciate what you did on this one. And don't think for a minute that I didn't see you come in on weekends. And don't think for a minute that I didn't know that you were in early. And I just want you to know how much I appreciate it. And what did you learn? Tell me, is there any part of this experience that was really great for you? Now people are speaking and they're telling you, well, I got so excited and I started talking to other people in the company, and you can feel like, wait a minute, like this is exciting. And then when you say to them, now we need to get on to this project, we're 2 weeks behind, they go, sure, I'm totally ready. But if you just jump, with the same guy I was telling you about earlier, he would jump. In the middle of recognition in a meeting one time, he looked at his watch and he goes, oh my God, we're way behind. We got to stop here. So he literally stopped the recognition. Told everybody it was insincere in the first place. It was just something on his, on
checklist.
His checklist. Exactly. And people feel that. And when they feel that, they turn on you.
So it's like making people feel genuinely valued as opposed to just being used.
The word genuinely is the issue. It has to be something that people can feel. And we all have a inner bullshit detector, and we can tell who to trust, who not to trust. So, in my language, if this isn't in your heart, don't try to fake it, because you're only going to make it worse.
So when I was reading your book, I came to the part about the heart research, and I wasn't expecting it. It was really fascinating research. So I'm wondering if you could share some highlights of what you've learned about how the heart is more than a metaphor.
Well, it's interesting, because when I had somebody say to me, somebody just sort of triggered this idea of, you really need to pin down what it was. So I've been managing people for over 20 years very successfully, and managing people profoundly differently than anybody around me and my peers. And as I continue to ascend and get higher and higher level positions, the greater the difference. So I'm this caring, supportive guy who's driving great performance. Everybody else was this kind of a manager, right? And so as I started to understand this, I was asking myself, well, what was the impact? Like, what was I doing that was influencing people? And ultimately I came to realize that I was affecting the hearts of people. And I remember the day that it happened, because when I had this epiphany, you would think, oh, well, hallelujah. Now you know where to go with this. And I went and told my wife I've wasted almost a year of my life, because the idea of leading with any degree of heart is the most preposterous, laughable idea in the world that I just came from. In fact, when the book came out, there were people, when they heard the title Lead from the Heart, they were like, what happened to Mark? Like, have a religious breakdown, or, I'm not kidding. Like, they didn't understand. No one ever looked to see what I'd been doing all along. They just saw the guy knows how to get results, right? No one ever looked under the hood. So when it came out, they were like, something, you have a spiritual awakening or something. It was like really, but in the process, I reached out to a world-class cardiologist, cardiosurgeon, and basically laid out my thesis. And I just said, look, I just want to know, is it possible that I was affecting the hearts of people? Like, is that like in your reality, or is I just making this up? And she said, you have figured out something that we're just figuring out in medicine right now, that we believed for many, many years, hundreds of years. When they first opened up the heart, all they saw was the bumpity bump pump, the pump. And there was no evidence of intelligence there, and there was no way of detecting it. So they just closed the body up and said, guess what? The heart is where the pump is, the mind is where all the cognitive ability is. And now 300 years later, science is, learning that that's just not really true. That the heart is this feeling, sensing organ, and that it's actually connected through what's called the vagus nerve, and it's sending more signals to the brain than the other way around. But what people are sensing at any given moment is influencing our minds to make decisions about it. So if you're working for somebody who's caring, you're feeling safe, you're feeling supported, and that says, keep going, this is great. And if you're working for somebody like I was describing, who you could feel like was threatening to you, or somebody who wasn't really that caring or authentic about it, that's sending a different message. So this woman who was this cardiosurgeon, she introduced me to this organization called the Institute of Heart Math. And one of the founders actually agreed, for reasons I don't understand, just generosity, mentored me to have this understanding of what the science was that they were the ones who were actually producing. And they've become quite famous since the book has come out. Now people are using their tools, and it's helping to moderate their heart rates and keeping them healthy. But in the essence of what I was looking for, what they confirmed was everything that I was doing in terms of managing people from my career was influencing them to marinate in positive emotions. And because all emotions are short-lived, whether they're negative emotions or positive, people need a steady diet of positive emotions in order to thrive. And the world is brutal, right? So we're always experiencing some negative emotions. Someone cuts us off in traffic, or, we get delayed on a phone call we don't want to be on. We're upset, we're frustrated, or the boss doesn't like our first draft. So we're always having negative emotions. You can't take them out, but what you need is this offset for people to thrive. So by caring about them, by teaching them, by coaching them, by appreciating them, by being an advocate for them, you're just marinating. These people are marinating in positive emotions, and you're setting them up for optimal performance. And that's what the Institute of Heart Math told me. So they're saying, lead from heart. Yeah, it's the most important thing we could do, because it's aligned to human nature. It's aligned to what keeps people thriving. And when people are thriving, they're going to do their best work.
Excellent. You talked about COVID before, but the work from home has sort of been thrust upon a lot of people. And it strikes me that it's, as a segue from the lead from the heart, one of the points in the book about the heart research was that the heart actually gives off electrical signals. It's not just a internal thing. Like, people can feel that, right?
Yeah, I forget what the distance is, but it's 5 or 6 feet. So if you're around someone, you can actually pick up their energy, and it's hearts picking up on the energy of other hearts.
So that's completely lost with work from home. So I guess if you could talk.
That's a really interesting comment that you just made, because I'm in the minority here. Everything says we have proved that work from home is great, and we've proved that people want it. And I'm like, I'm from Missouri here. Show me, because I don't really believe long term that this is what people really are going to want. Now, interestingly, in the technology world, there are some jobs. If you're coding all day long, you're kind of a introverted kind of a person. Maybe those kinds of jobs, so you're seeing some of these organizations like Twitter and Facebook say you can work from home or work remotely indefinitely. But interestingly, yesterday or the day before, the CEO of Google said, we're not having you come back until September.
Right.
But he didn't commit to letting people work indefinitely. And I think there's people are beginning to realize that the connection part, which is all about the heart, is so essential to people. it's not just the synchronistic conversations that people have by the theoretical water cooler, that I'm sharing ideas with you and you're sharing with me. Now we go off in a new enhanced direction. That's important. What really important is just being with people. We
Hmm.
need that to thrive, and that's been taken away from us, whether we're working from home or not. We have far less. Don't go be with your family at Christmas. Don't go be with your family at Thanksgiving. It's like, wow, like what a takeaway that is. Don't be with your colleagues for 10 months, right? Don't see them. Don't be with them. Be
Right.
with them at Zoom. I just don't think, I think truly what's going to happen is that we may say, Andrew, once a week or every other Friday, work from home, but I need you in the office. That's what I think is going to happen. And simply because that's where people, it's a community that we
Right.
spend 10, 11, 12 hours a day there. This is our family. Even if you don't like some of the people, it's still part of where you're getting your human connection. And I think it's such an essential need. And I think what we're looking at now in terms of mental illness, mental health,
Right.
stress, anxiety, the numbers are going like this. And you go, well, what changed? And I think, well, what changed is that people don't have the connection that they used to, and it's destabilizing. I could come into your office and say, I had this fight with my wife last night. I don't know what to do about it. Now you can say, well, I've had fights with my wife, and she's done this before, and that helped me. And so now all of a sudden, you've changed me. Am I going to have that conversation with you on Zoom? Am I going to call you up and say, hey, I'm just going to deal with it on my own? And it's sort of this weird example that just popped into my head, but it's really just this example of the kinds of conversations that you might have with someone that you would do over a cup of coffee, or sticking your head in their office, or walking down the hall after a meeting. And they're meaningful. They're like really
Right.
meaningful.
And relationships build through that serendipity as opposed to by a Zoom appointment.
Correct. Right. It's out of sight, out of mind. I have the idea right now. I walk in and ask you because you're my friend. Right. If you're not there, I'm like, I'm not going to do it. I have somebody that I'm really close to, someone who's done tremendous work for me, but he's like a dear friend of mine. And I realized we haven't spoken in like 3 or 4 months. We've emailed, sent stuff back, but we haven't really talked because I think you just get into your, I got to get this stuff done today kind of a mode. And nobody's going, hey, Mark, do you have a second? um, and we miss out on that. But it's really, when you're talking about the heart sending energy back and forth, there's something going on there in terms of what we need in order to, feel something from other people.
There's another comment about work from home. I made a note. I heard a Scott Galloway interview where he was talking about proximity is a key component of relationships, and proximity is also he was referring to proximity to the power centers. So, like, if you're working from home, you're just not part of that dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, I keep tweeting this stuff out because I've had people sort of, I won't say attack me, but they think I got it all wrong and that we're all going to be working from home and no one's going back to their offices. And I just think, well, let's just ride this thing out. So in the meantime, there's all sorts of research, and now what people are saying is kind of what you were just talking about. One is, the longer I work from home, the less my boss knows what I'm really doing. Right. So he probably thinks I'm doing laundry or watching Netflix and I'm really killing myself here, and he can't, or she can't see me. And so that creates this sort of anxiety for people. The other is that by being out of sight, out of mind, I'm not going to get considered for an opportunity to grow. Right. So my theory is that, or my belief is that the ability to work from home is only permissible because of our being connected in person. I know you and I have had meetings, we've gone out to dinner, we've worked on projects together. Now all of a sudden we're forced to work from home. That's seamless. We can sustain that for a while, even though we're not getting the human, the real human connection. At least I know you, I know what to expect from
Right.
you, you know what to expect from me, right? So now, this thing keeps going and we hire somebody new. You don't know that person. Well, how are you going to, how are you going to cultivate a relationship with them, right? It's much
Exactly.
easier to do that in person. And it's much easier to brainstorm in person and have conversations as teams. And what are you going to do? No, I want to do this. And somebody wants to insert themselves into a Zoom call. And by the time they've made a joke or made a comment, people didn't hear it. What did you say, Andrew? Oh, never mind. It's just lost in, in
In the
this.
ether.
Yeah, exactly. You just took the words out of my mouth. It's lost in the ether.
You wrote a Fast Company article titled "How the Wrong People Get Promoted and How to Change It," and you quoted a Gallup study that says managers account for 70% of the variance in employee engagement scores. This is the point I wanted to come back to when you were talking about that boss who doesn't really care about anybody except himself. Reminds me of the phrase, people don't quit companies, they quit bosses.
It's true.
Wonder if you wanted to comment on that particular article or anything related to the idea of bad bosses.
Yeah, it's interesting. A Columbia University professor wrote a whole book on this after this article came out, and basically what it says, and I'll give you this example of, and basically what it says is that just because you're a really great individual contributor doesn't mean you're going to be a great manager. It often means you're not going to be a good manager at all. And here's why. The skill set that it takes, let's say I use this example when I speak, and I call it Susie, this number one salesperson. So think about Susie. You go by her, cubicle, and she's got all the sales results up there, and you can see Susie's name circled and all the notes from senior managers going, "Way to go, Susie, number one again." And so Susie's just like knows she's number one, wants to be number one, thriving in being number one. So all of a sudden the sales manager for the team leaves the company and management gets together and says, "What are we going to do?" And so somebody goes, "I have a great idea. If we don't do something about Susie, she's going to end up leaving. Some competitor is going to come in and take her. So you know what we should do? We should make her the manager, because if we manage her, we're going to give her a title. And not only are we going to give her a title, but she's going to go make everybody else on that team just as good as she is." So everybody's high-fiving each other, saying, "What a great, brilliant decision this is." They make Susie the sales manager, and Susie is an awful sales manager. So you ask, well, why? The reason is because Susie's motivations are almost the antithesis of what makes a great coach and manager, right? If they're singularly focused on being number one, if somebody gets close to them, they're going to step on their hands, right? They're not going to be the one to say, "Hey, here's what I think. Here's some of the tricks of the trade. Here's some things that I've learned that have helped me close more sales." Are they going to share that information? Are they going to say, "Hey, come on in here. I want to teach you what I know"? No, they're threatened by other people. They want the recognition for themselves, right?
And it takes time away from them meeting their own quota.
All of it, but there's a competitive instinct there,
right.
That isn't, it's like, "Hey, do you have time to teach me?" "Well, I'd like to, but I really don't have." So, it's like Susie's off limits. So, but we make her the manager. Does she change her stripes? Does she instantly say, "Oh, well, I'm in a different role now and I need to behave differently"? No. So what happens is the big boss comes in. Now Andrew is our number one salesperson, right? And Susie's the sales manager. And the big boss comes in and goes, "Andrew, you're the new number one. Congratulations." How does that make Susie feel? You would think, well, she should be proud because Andrew works for her. But instead, it's like, well, I used to get that recognition. I was the one who was number one. So now I'm going to compete with you. And this is one of the big complaints from people, is they feel that their boss competes with them. Now Andrew's trying to get my job, or Andrew's getting all the recognition that I used to get. So am I going to help Andrew? No. Am I going to help everybody else? No. So Susie continues to sort of bring the personality and attributes that she had before she became a manager into that role. And Susie's an example of a salesperson, but it's really that we shouldn't expect, just because someone's a great architect, that they're going to suddenly be a really good manager of people. So what we need to look for is somebody who has the competency, but not necessarily the excellence. You don't have to be the most knowledgeable person to be a good manager. What you need is an orientation to help people grow and develop and feel good and bring teams together and teach them. My best example of this is a guy named Bruce Bochy, who was a backup catcher for the San Diego Padres, one of the most mediocre programs in Major League Baseball for the last 50 years. One of the few teams who never won a World Series. But Bruce Bochy was the backup catcher. So he'd back up for a horrible team. So he made it to the major leagues, but he was never a star. But what he was good at was bringing the team together and helping other people learn. So he's still in the major leagues for 9 years. So that's remarkable, right? He just wasn't a star. But somebody saw in him this like ability to identify talent and to teach people and put their arm around them. And the San Diego Padres made him their manager. What does he do? He took them to the World Series. They hadn't been in the World Series in 14 years. They got clobbered by the New York Yankees. 4 games, the Yankees killed them all 4 games. What did the Padres do to reward them for getting them to the World Series that they'd only been in one other time in their history? They fired him. They said, we should have done better. So the San Francisco Giants hired him. And what did he do for the San Francisco Giants? He won 3 World Series in 7 years. He's going to go in the Hall of Fame as one of the greatest baseball managers of all time. So the lesson is, Bruce Bochy, was he Barry Bonds, this home run hitter? Was he the star player? No. What was he? He was a professional baseball player for 9 years. He understood the game, but he had an orientation of assembling the right people, teaching the right skills, making people collaborate, know their roles, and inspiring people to do great things. That's what we're looking for. So find another way of rewarding your top performers because they don't necessarily make good managers.
So you do public speaking and consulting, and and I read in your bio, one of the things you talk about is organizational culture. I'm wondering if you could talk about what it is that you mean by that and what you do for your clients.
Well, I mean, I'd say that in a nutshell, the big picture is that what values you create for your organization, as long as you live to them, is really what defines how you want people to behave. And there's all sorts of, like you look at Amazon, it's this kind of ruthless organization where people are working for money, they're working for an opportunity to do interesting work because they're still on the cutting edge. They're looking for the beneficiary of being a stock owner, and stock has made a lot of people rich. But when you talk to people who work there, very few will ever tell you, I really enjoy going to work because of the culture. But people are willing to go there for all those other reasons. Most companies, on the other hand, people want to know that their values match up to the way the organization is run. And so what I help organizations do is to identify, who do we want to be? And it's largely aspirational because you're never going to get to the end. But what you want is to be able to say, these things, these values, is really the filter that we use in making all of our business decisions. So if you want to say you're fair and caring, for example, and you make decisions that are unfair and people routinely feel uncared for, well, then their culture is bullshit. And
Right.
actually what makes things even worse is when people see values espoused and then senior managers behaving in ways that are totally unaligned. So, what I say to the CEOs and the senior managers is, don't bother with this exercise if you're not going to commit to it, because it forces you to, you would make a different decision if your decision is to be a fair organization and you kind of go, well, my nephew, he just got out of college and I think I really want to help him get a job. And so I'm going to catapult him into a management role that he doesn't really have a background for. And that's going to take away from people who've been killing themselves for the last 5 years. Am I going to hire my nephew? Not if you truly want to be fair. And so it's really challenging organizations to think about who is it that you want to be, because if you truly live the values, people are totally engaged because it's like, this company stands for something. This company truly means what they say. That's the trust element. And so I help organizations not only identify what their values are, because every organization is different. So it's not like everybody wants to be fair and caring. Those are 2 elements that should belong in some organizations, but not necessarily. But ultimately what you decide, I'm challenging the CEOs to say, don't go out there and communicate this if you're not going to live it. And if you do live it, it's going to elevate you. But there's, we talked about this at the beginning. Humans are tempted by the devil on this shoulder to say, I'm still going to hire my nephew. And the minute you make that decision, you're no longer fair.
It reminds me of other intangibles that companies talk about, like quality or brand. It's not what you say you are, it's what you actually do.
Correct. And that's really the point. So the purpose of having values is to clarify them so people can see, oh, that's what we're trying to be. But if you work for a boss who doesn't emulate those in any way, shape, or form, then they go out the door. So there has to be this constant reinforcing. I was at Google, and one of the things that's happened at Google is they started off very small, and then all of a sudden they were 1,000 employees and 5,000 employees and 10,000 employees, and they started to realize that sort of the culture that they had created intentionally was being diluted because people were coming in from other organizations and hadn't been anchored on the values of the company, right? And so people were coming in and behaving in ways that really weren't aligned to the values. So what they did was, very smartly, they kind of had what I'll call a brand ambassador. So they picked people who had been with the company since the beginning, and they said, we want you to be a brand ambassador in the sense that you're reinforcing what we're all about and reminding people what we're looking for. So this woman said to me, I had to tell somebody the other day that their behavior wasn't very googly. And, and I thought, well, that's really good. So the employees themselves are the ones who are holding up those values.
So I read on your website that your book is assigned reading in 9 universities. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And maybe that's a good sign that maybe the problems that we talked about in the beginning are going to be addressed in the way that managers are trained, or management education.
It's interesting because education embraced this idea long before business did. So they're basically saying, this is the future and we see it and this is what we want to be teaching. Business is the one saying, oh, no, you don't bring hard into business, So I've gotten much more resistance from business than I ever got from education. Education just seemed to get it from, immediately, which is good, right? Because now what's happened is that people who have read this book, who had to write papers on it and do other readings that are related to it, they've now gone off into companies and they're going to start to manage people. And what's interesting is that I participate with a lot of these students. Not all the universities have me involved, but I'm very active in an undergraduate program at the Northern Arizona University, and then with a PhD educational leadership PhD program at Brandman University, which is part of Chapman University program. And by interacting with them, speaking to them, reading their papers, all of that, one thing that's been really clear is I don't get students saying, this is bullshit. I'm getting students saying, I work, I have a job outside of school and I've never been managed like this. And this is the future. So that's been very encouraging for me when I get business saying, sounds like kumbaya to me. This is serious what I'm talking about. It's not, it's not just nice to be nice. And it's really not about being nice at all. You have to be demanding. You have to set expectations. You have to set a high bar. This leadership is about driving performance. I'm saying this just happens to be the best way to get there.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for the great conversation. And again, let me get the book up there, Lead from the Heart. There's a review on thekeypoint.org. I have links to Amazon. I'll put links in the YouTube description. And thanks very much.
Andrew, thank you so very much and happy holidays.
You too.
Take care.